Welcome to In the Studio. I'm Red Beard, bringing you the stories behind the greatest rock and roll albums in history. Today, we'll go in the studio for the first of a special two-part series, an exclusive conversation with the builder of rock and roll's most famous Wall.
This is Roger Waters in the studio for The Wall.
In 1987, Rolling Stone magazine published a list of the greatest live performances in rock and roll history. And high on that list was a tour from the year 1980, a series of shows that Rolling Stone said, quote, took the theatrical potential of live rock to its most vivid extreme. The tour they were talking about was Pink Floyd's The Wall. It was a show so complex and so expensive to produce that it was only performed 30 times. It was a spectacle beyond anything rock and roll audiences had ever seen, an assault of light and sound and special effects that no one has dared to try since. There were crashing planes, electronic creatures, and of course, the wall itself, 35 feet high, 200 feet wide. It was constructed on stage as the audience watched, slowly growing, brick by brick. And when it was finished, Pink Floyd was out of sight, separated from its audience by the wall. It was Roger Waters' vision that built the wall. It was his concept, his story, his personal passion play. He wrote most of the songs and all of the lyrics, and he remembers how the show began.
So much happened in the show that it would take an enormous amount of time to explain it all. I mean, the audience come in and there's about 40% of the wall across the arena, so it's a jagged kind of line, a bit like the inside of the album sleeve. An announcer came on and made a speech in a dinner jacket. He was actually an actor. But I wanted to make a point during the show, so I had this guy come on and say, please don't block the freeways and don't do this and don't do that and don't do, and all those kind of things that people say in shows. But that was actually a device for something that happened later on. And then the band appeared, but in all the black stuff, and it was actually the Surrogate band on a stage out front, and they were all wearing masks, so they looked like us, but they weren't us. They were four other guys. And they played the beginning of In the Flesh. A drape went up behind the wall, and there we were. And then a plane came in from the back, you know, a model kind of Stuka, about 15, 20 feet wingspan, and went over a bit of the wall, and a kind of explosion happens, and then the baby cries, and then we go into the thin ice, and then the band are revealed on the back while this band at the front, so the audience realizes that the people that they applauded starting are not actually Pink Floyd, they're somebody else, and it went on like that until the end of the first half.
The themes that Roger Waters explored in The Wall, questions about alienation and madness, weren't new ones for him. His bleak visions of a society losing touch with itself had also permeated Pink Floyd's 1977 album, Animals. As Pink Floyd grew more and more successful as the audience and profits grew larger and larger, Waters found himself feeling isolated and out of touch, cut off from the real world, cut off from himself. For Roger Waters, that emotional barrier, that personal wall, was something real and frightening. I asked him if he thinks everyone has their own wall to deal with.
I think everybody does, yeah. It's just that, happily, some people's walls are smaller than others. I think mine was a big one. In fact, actually, I think an awful lot of people's walls are enormous and insurmountable, and they never ever get past them. I don't know what they do. They become, armed robbers or politicians, or they may stay completely in the depths and, in what would appear to us to be the kind of dregs of society and hang around on street corners mugging people, or they may equally rise to positions of great power. They're the dangerous ones, the ones that are cut off but are nevertheless in positions of some political power. I think we all know people who would do a better job as President of the United States than Ronald Reagan or George Bush, but they don't become President of the United States because they wouldn't touch the position with a barge pole, because they're more humane than that, and they can't and they're not prepared to waste all the energy that you have to waste in lying and cheating and going to committee meetings and kissing babies and shaking hands and all that crap that those people have to go through in order to achieve the positions of power that they eventually do, or that some of them do. So the flaw in democracy is that the guy who is going to work hard enough to get your vote is almost inevitably and invariably not the right man to vote for. It's a paradox, I think.
I asked Roger Waters to tell us how the idea of the wall began.
The idea derived from the theatrical idea of constructing a wall between a rock and roll band and the audience that it was purporting to communicate with. And that idea arose specifically out of the Animals tour. Because we were playing in stadiums almost exclusively for the first time, and it became clear to me after doing one or two, from the conversation backstage and from the response in front of the stage and for the things that happened afterwards and from the injuries and the this and the that and the general vibe I got, that this was no longer musicians writing and performing songs, and well, it was, but that was no longer important. What had become important was the gross. It really upset me over a period. We were, I don't know, playing stadiums for 6 or 7 weeks, and it really started to get to me. And the last one we did was in Montreal in the Olympic Stadium, 90,000 people stretching forever into the distance, chain link fencing in front of the stage, kids on a, apparently on some kind of Pavlovian dog trip of screaming their heads off from the moment that we appeared on stage till the moment we left. Nobody listening, well, not nobody, I'm sure there were a lot of people in the audience who were trying to listen. Very difficult for an audience to pay attention to what's going on. And what was important, and I've been to lots of stadium shows since, and with the exception, I think, of Live Aid, they're all the same. What's important, is the demagogy, is the worship of the very rich people. Rich in terms of having earned a lot of money, but also maybe rich in terms of the way the audience perceives how it must be to have written such and such a song, or to be that popular, or whatever. It's the worship of idols from afar, and I find it distressing. So at the end of this Montreal show, I found myself, there was some kid trying to climb up the chain link fencing. I got so angry with this kid who was screaming all through, I don't know, Mother, and one of the quieter songs anyway. I finally got so angry that I spat at this child. Well, he was 14 or 15, I suppose. And when I came off stage afterwards, I thought, what have I been reduced to here? And what has happened to the relationship between the band and the audience? And so the wall was something that I experienced very powerfully through most of that tour, but specifically on that day. So at that point I thought, well, if I ever go out on the road again, because I was very sorely tempted never to do it again, there are two things. One, I will never play in a big stadium again, because I think it's wrong. It's not the right place for rock and roll to be. It's only about greed and ego. And two, I need to express these feelings about how I feel about the breakdown of whatever between me and the audience. And so that was really the start of the wall. Most people perceived Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 as an attack upon education and teachers, which it wasn't at all. It was a part of a large story of my autobiography, if you like, but it was never meant as a broad attack upon education, because education is obviously very important. An educated human being is often well, actually, no, that's stupid. I was going to say he's often happier than an uneducated one, but of course that's not true at all. But I think if you live in an urban environment, it is necessary to know a bit about a lot of things if you're going to make any sense of it and work out how you can be happy.
Ironically, this album, Roger Waters' attack on the dark side of rock stardom, yielded Pink Floyd's first #1 single, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. Waters' diatribe against cruel, sarcastic teachers featured the voices of some actual school children, recorded in London by engineer Nick Griffiths.
We sent him a multi-track tape over from LA, and I spoke to him on the phone. Will you do this? I want you to get some kids in and do this. And he went, all right, I'll do that. And so he went into the studio on his own in London and put the kids on Another Brick too. And I'll never forget this multi-track arriving back at Producer's Workshop in LA by a courier. I got it out of the box and said, put this on. And they put it onto the multi-track. And we just pushed all the faders up to kind of halfway up and played it without any mixing at all. And I remember the first time I heard it go by, shivers going down my spine. I thought, well, this is fantastic.
There were some complaints about having school children singing "We Don't Need No Education." I asked Roger where the children were found.
Islington Green School, it was called. And it's a primary school, so it's from kids aged 6 to 11. And it was the local school where the Pink Floyd studio was in North London. It's a kind of working class neighbourhood, sort of half and half, black and white kids, and a not very well off neighbourhood. And of course they came in and they rather liked this song. They thought it was quite good. And so they sang it under Nick's direction, they sang it with great gusto, and I thought the result was just marvellous. And as soon as I heard it, I said, that is the single.
By the time recording sessions began for The Wall in April 1979, Roger Waters had become Pink Floyd's dominant creative force. Although David Gilmour's co-writing and guitar sound was a critical element, it was Waters who controlled the direction of the music. In later years, Roger's insistence on creative control alienated him from Gilmour, Rick Wright, and Nick Mason, and eventually led to his departure. But in 1979, it was Waters who set the Pink Floyd agenda.
I brought a tape. In fact, I brought 2 tapes to the first listening session, which one was The Wall and the other was The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. I'd had a rather fertile time, so I was terribly efficient, and I gave folders to the other guys in the band, and we all sat down and listened to these 2 demo tapes, and I said, I'm going to do one of these as a solo album, and we'll do one as a band album, because I was beginning to feel the need to do something on my own. And I gave them the choice, and they quite cleverly chose The Wall.
David Gilmour and Roger Waters produced most of Pink Floyd's albums themselves. But for The Wall, they brought in a third producer, Bob Ezrin. I asked Roger Waters to explain Bob Ezrin's contributions to The Wall.
He would be prepared to argue with me about things. He's articulate enough to be, it's no good arguing with me in the studio and saying, I don't like that. You've got to explain to me why you don't like it and why we should do it a different way or make a suggestion or whatever, And Bob is articulate and quite able to do that. So we had a good, lively relationship making the record. He was a very good musical and intellectual sounding board for me, because he's very bright and he's quite tough as well, and so we could sit and talk about what it was about ad nauseam, which was absolutely invaluable, because I don't think anybody else in the band had any idea of what it was about, and I don't think they were very interested. In fact, I know they weren't interested. And so that was one thing. He also brought a discipline to the production of the record. He would sit in the studio for hour after hour with Nick trying to get the drum tracks in time, and eventually did. And so he provided the record with a pocket, a rhythmic kind of pocket within which the songs could sit and be listenable to.
This is United States calling. Are we reaching? He keeps hanging up. And it's a man answering.
That's a real telephone operator there, as Roger Waters explains.
That's the best bit in terms of the theatre of the record. I'll tell you what happened. I wanted to get across somehow that the guy's calling his wife and she's got a lover. So I thought, well, how about if I ring up the operator and ask an operator to call this number collect in London and tell her that I'm calling my wife, and have prearranged that somebody in London would pick the phone up and say hello, and then when he heard collect call for Mrs. Floyd from Mr. Floyd, will you accept the charges, just hang up. And then I would keep asking this person to the lady who is on the record was only the second operator I tried. The first one didn't get it at all, but this second one, who is on the record, her imagination just went berserk, and she immediately realised that my wife was having an affair with somebody else, and all that stuff of, and it's a man answering, and is there supposed to be anybody else there? That was just this woman getting excited about the thought that she was listening to the breakdown of a marriage going on.
The sessions for The Wall were spread over 8 months and 4 studios, 1 in New York, 1 in Los Angeles, and 2 in the south of France. The jumping around was partly because of tax laws. In fact, financial considerations dictated much of the way The Wall was recorded. Roger Waters.
Well, we were going to do it in London, and then we had an extraordinary reverse in that we had channeled a lot of money into a company in London who was supposed to be investing it and so forth, and unfortunately they stole it all instead. But they stole it in a way that the revenue in England still wanted us to pay tax on it. So 5 years after Dark Side of the Moon, we were completely skint. Having got this piece of work that looked as if it might be a good one, we decided reluctantly to go and make the record in the south of France. But I confess that the reasons for making the record in the south of France were purely for the fear of being broke.
Like many Pink Floyd albums, is punctuated with ambient sounds, jarring noises, pieces of conversations, the noise of television shows, and the stunningly real sound of helicopters. Roger Waters says those helicopter sounds were recorded at an airport near Los Angeles by engineer Brian Christian.
He went to Burbank and he recorded, I think it's a Jet Ranger, and he did it with a Sennheiser gun mic. And that's the sound, and he did a great job. It's a really nice track. In fact, Kate Bush, a couple of years ago, wanted to use a helicopter on one of her records, and she tried to record helicopters and couldn't. She rang up and asked me if she could use that sound effect, and could I give it to her? And I said, sure, just give the band a credit on the record, and you're welcome to it, and send her a copy of it over. And she used it, I believe. I'm not sure which record it was, but I believe she used it. So Brian did that. Brian also smashed the TV set wearing goggles, and with a sort of sledgehammer, and that was in the parking lot of Producers Workshop in LA.
The members of Pink Floyd were never very comfortable with stardom. They were, for the most part, a band without a face. Even as they were selling millions of records and selling out huge stadiums, many of their fans would have been hard-pressed to name a single member of the band. Some of them knew that David Gilmour was the guitarist, that Roger Waters played bass, and that the two of them wrote most of the songs. But most fans couldn't tell one member of Pink Floyd from the other, wouldn't have known Rick Wright or Nick Mason if they'd walked straight into their living rooms. But as much as the members of Pink Floyd resisted it, a certain amount of celebrity was unavoidable. There was no way to play concerts in front of 50,000 people and hope to remain truly anonymous. There was no way to avoid being mobbed, being followed, being worshipped. It was the last part, the idolatry of it all, that bothered Roger Waters the most. He saw a dark side to the spotlight, and it frightened him. The sheer size, the unreality of it all, seemed dangerous to Roger. Those were the emotions that led him to write The Wall. It was an album about alienation, about distance, about losing touch. But more than that, it was an album about reaching out. Roger Waters built The Wall so that he could finally tear it down.
When I go to the movies or listen to records or whatever, just occasionally I see something that moves me to the extent that I feel, well, yeah, I understand that. I can understand this man or this woman. I feel like that too a bit. I get a good feeling knowing that there's somebody else out there who feels the same way. Well, we're getting into the songs of The Wall now. Does anybody else out there feel the way I do? That's all it's about, really. Firing my arrows into the void with the hope that somebody will catch one of them and go, yeah, I recognise this feeling. And it gives you, you know, well, for me anyway, when I go and see a really good movie that expresses some feeling that I have or something, it gives me heart to carry on, you know, and it gives me strength to go on trying to be human.
David Gilmour and Roger Waters have always had very different personalities. Gilmour tends to be pragmatic and laid back. Waters more emotional, more volatile. By the time Dark Side of the Moon was released in 1973, the differences between Waters and Gilmour were already affecting their relationship. By 1979, when recording sessions began for The Wall, they were openly adversarial. Here's Roger Waters.
Let's be honest about this. By the time we were doing The Wall, the band really didn't exist. Dark Side of the Moon was really that was a band. But I think bands get together and they want to be successful and they want to be this and they want to be that. And I think with Dark Side of the Moon we achieved everything that we could. Wish You Were Here was a very good title for that album and has been reasonably well documented in other interviews and things. I've often said what that album should really have been called was Wish We Were Here, because we weren't really. And already the rot had set in, and the only thing that was holding Pink Floyd together at that time was fear and avarice. You know, there's the fear that if you split up, your world will fall apart. You know, when you have a golden goose like Pink Floyd, it's very hard to let go of it. But by the time we got into The Wall, really it was my band. It was my work, and we did what I said, and the others did as they were told, and that was all there was to it. If your perception was that here was the ultimate band, and and we were all sort of jolly and happy and cooperating, it wasn't like that. I'm not saying I did it all, because I didn't. Obviously, Dave Gilmour's contribution to the making of The Wall was huge. He's a marvellous guitarist, and he contributed to a number of songs in terms of their construction and so on and so forth. But we were not a together unit. But the band was really difficult then, and the live shows of The Wall were the swan song. That was it. That was all that we could possibly achieve. It was over.
Roger Waters talks about the most elaborate rock concert ever produced, the live version of Pink Floyd's The Wall.
It really was unbelievably expensive to put on. So we did a week in the Sports Arena in LA, and then a week in Nassau Coliseum in New York, and then a week in London, and a week in Germany, in Dortmund. And that was it. And in fact, I think we did one more week in London the following year. The reason that we did so few shows was because indoors it was really too expensive to countenance. We lost about 600 grand, I think, doing the shows. And so you couldn't really make a case for going on doing it. Because I think what the world was getting out of it was not worth the expense of putting it on. And I refused to do it outdoors. Larry Magid, bless him, the main promoter in Philadelphia, said, please come and do it. He'd seen the show in LA, and then he said, please come and do it in JFK Stadium in Philadelphia, outdoors. He said, I will guarantee you a clear $1 million a night to do it. But how can you do a show that's about the alienation that you feel about doing stadium shows in a stadium?
From the beginning, Roger Waters envisioned The Wall as more than just a rock album, and in 1982 a film version was released, directed by Alan Parker. Roger Waters wrote the screenplay.
I always thought that it might make a movie, and then Alan Parker expressed a great interest in it, and we talked, and I started writing odd bits of screenplay, and I don't know, it just slowly happened. To start with, it was going to be a kind of combination of show film, of rock and roll concert film, with illustrations of what the concert was about. And it stopped being that quite quickly and turned into what it eventually became.
Comfortably Numb, written by David Gilmour and Roger Waters. The lead character in the film version of The Wall was played by Bob Geldof, who at the time was lead singer for the Boomtown Rats. 3 years later, he was the man who organized Live Aid. Roger Waters remembers how Geldof was cast.
Alan suggested him, and I said, yeah, good idea, great idea, see if he's interested. And so he called him up, and he wasn't interested, but he decided to do it anyway. In fact, there's a very funny story. He was asked to do it, and he was going to do some gigs on the continent, and he went with Faulkner O'Kelly, who was his manager at the time, I don't know, maybe he still is, to the airport, and he was going, I've been asked to do this Pink Floyd bloody Wall thing, what a load of crap, and raw bloody rubbish, they send me this, I can't, and Faulkner was trying to persuade him that it would be a good career move, and da-da-da, bloody bloody blah, and da-da-da-da, and none of this would ever have come to light, except that my brother was the cab driver. I laid this on Geldof later at the time. He could not believe it, quite rightly, because what an incredible coincidence. It was my brother John. So anyway, at least Bob and I never had any kind of, there was never any pussyfooting about what he thought about Pink Floyd and the music and so on and so forth, because he was extremely scathing about the whole thing. And I never tried to persuade him differently. You know, these bog Irish, you can't tell them anything. They wouldn't understand. There's no point in me I'm not going to waste my education on Geldof trying to explain The Wall to him. He understands, he just doesn't realise he understands. Because he does understand, and if there's one man in the world who understands, it's got to be Geldof. Bless him.
There was some interesting casting on the album version of The Wall as well. People you might not expect to hear on a Pink Floyd album. Among the backup singers were Bruce Johnston of the Beach Boys and Tony Tennille of the Captain and Tennille. I'm serious. Originally, Waters had tried to get the Beach Boys themselves, but
I got a call from Bruce and said, I'm not sure that the Beach Boys want to sing that one looks Jewish and that one's a coon and that one's a queer and all of that. I don't think that's really where the Beach Boys are at. But if you want that vibe, that sound, I can put you together a team who'll do it. And the team was Bruce, Tony Tennille, John Joyce, Jim Haas, Stan Farber and Joe Chimay. See, I can even remember their names because they were great guys, and they made a fantastic section. And in fact, whenever I play in LA now, the four guys who came on the road with us, which was Jim, John, Stan and Joe, they always come and do my gig. They come and sing in the flesh. And they still got John Joyce, who was the kind of the one who kind of, I don't know, he's kind of the leader. I think it's because he's the smallest. He's still got the music, and they arrive with the music, and we sit down in the in the band room and go, yeah, it went like this, bam, and they do it, and then we do it on stage. If you ever want anybody to do Beach Boys impersonations, they're your guy.
Of course, the dispute between Roger Waters and David Gilmour is now a very public one. Waters has sued in an attempt to stop his former bandmates from recording and touring under the Pink Floyd name. But the disputes have been going on for a long time. It's just that 10 years ago, they were not public knowledge.
We didn't do press, you see. We never spoke to anybody. I've got a very old friend called Gary Stromberg. In fact, he is the man who introduced me to my wife, for which I will be eternally grateful. He introduced us because he was employed on one of the tours, the Wish You Were Here tour, 1975, to do our publicity. His brief was no. And that was it. We said, Gary, we want you to come on the whole tour and deal with the press and the media in every way possible. And the answer is no. Can we have no. Can we do an interview? No. Can we take no. No. All you have to do is keep saying no, and that's your job.
The concert version of The Wall, because of its expense and complexity, was only presented 30 times back in 1980 and 81. No one ever expected to see it again. But Roger Waters says there's a chance that he'd perform The Wall one more time. Listen closely to what he's about to say.
And the second half was really about breaking through the wall. But there was a hotel room built into it that flapped down. Oh, it went on and on and on. It was, I have to say, it was absolutely wonderful. And I may say also that I'm toying with the idea of doing it again, because one of the things that I got out of my acrimonious departure from my ex-colleagues was all the rights to all of that. It was the only thing I ever really insisted on, was that I got the wall. So I might even do it again. I thought what would be a good idea would be I'm told that they're thinking seriously about tearing down the wall in West Berlin as a sort of theatrical gesture when they do it. I might try and persuade who is it, Helmut Kohl, who's in charge over there now, to build this thing at the Brandenburg Gate or at Checkpoint Charlie or something. We'll build it there, and that's the only place that I would ever do it outdoors. And we'll have a kind of a symbolic tearing down of the wall at the end of a production of the wall, because I think it would be apposite at that point if they decide to destroy that thing. And then I would do it again then. I might even let Dave play guitar. There you are. Now I can't say further than that, can I?
Not only is Roger Waters thinking about performing The Wall once more, he also revealed that he has the 1980 and 81 concerts on film. And yes, he may make them available for those of us who weren't lucky enough to see the original shows.
It was filmed in 1980 and 1981 in London. I've got that. I've got all that, and I am putting it together. I don't want to, sell it, really. Not because I want to not because I don't want anybody to see it. I'm not quite sure why I don't want to, but it is there, and at some point it will be available for anybody who didn't. You see, I've always been very reluctant to release. Well, I've never cut it or anything, but I am thinking about it now. But I've always been reluctant because it was a very strong theatrical experience for the people who were there. But on videotape, it will really be a kind of historical document. It can't possibly be the event, because, you needed to be there with another 12,000 people, with the quadraphonic sound and with the aeroplane going. But nevertheless, for people like you, who never saw it, it would be, and who are, fans of the music and interested, it would be a very interesting document. I wouldn't call it a performance, but I would say a document, a record of the event. So you can at least see what happened, but you will never be able to have been there, if you see what I mean.
Once again, our deepest gratitude to Roger Waters for helping us reconstruct The Wall. And congratulations to Roger on this week's live performance of The Wall at the Remains of the Berlin Wall. And special thanks go to Nick Griffiths, to Arma Andon, and to Paul Rappaport at Columbia Records. You could write to us in the studio at Post Office Box 6190, Burbank, California 91510. In the Studio is a Bullet production, produced by Redbeard, written by Joe Rhodes, tape editors Doug Hall and Rick R.J. Lane, digital mastering by John Parthen. The executive producer of In the Studio is Stephen R. Smith.